Greetings, fellow cultist. It is Rob, and welcome back to the channel. And this is another episode of White Box Weekly, where we're going to be discussing what happened in my weekly White Box campaign. I will tell you that my White Box campaign is a combination of White Box, Ravenloft, and Lovecraftian horror, all mixed together. If you'd like to know what rules and books I used to do this, go back into the playlist, and all the videos are in there. Just watch them in order. We are now into our third session of play, and things took a turn last night. So, when we left off last week, the heroes had made their way down to the beach and found the 8-foot poles, or the 8 poles that were 7 or 8 feet high that had been planted in the beach where people had been tied up, specifically women. And I think I'll stop right here and go ahead and put a disclaimer in. My game does have some mature themes in it. I don't go into a lot of detail because I don't care for that myself, but those mature themes are there, so if that kind of thing offends you, feel free to exit stage left. Alright, for everybody who's left, if you remember, they were realizing that these poles were meant for the 3 women they saw taken to the beach and the 5 women in the group. And we ended with Zadok Allen up on the bluffs above them trying to get their attention, saying, "No, no, come away, come up here." So that's where they headed. We pick up this week with them meeting with Zadok Allen and him telling them to stay away from those poles. Horrible things happened there last night. And they ask him if he saw what happened, and he claims no, he did not see it, but he could hear it. It was horrific what had happened. They got a pretty good picture of what happened. The women were brought back, which they saw from their room in the Gilman house. The women were brought back to the church, very disheveled, and looked like they'd had a rough night of it. So there was some more dialogue with Zadok. One of the players had bought him some clothing to help him out. They have very much befriended this character, and they end up leaving from there, realizing now that they need to go save these women, and that this is probably the best time to do it. They have the most tactical advantage. All of these cultists, or as I like to say, normal people, were up all night long chanting and dragging women to the beach for the deep ones, and oops, shouldn't have said that. Anyway, bringing them back to the church. The locate object spell had told the Nate's magic user that the white nightgown he was seeking was in the church somewhere. So they did question Zadok about the church. He told them how the inside of it had been pretty badly defaced, and that there was an entrance at the back of the church that led down into the basement, but he'd never been down there. So the group, and let me pull up my handy dandy map here. When they're talking to him, they're up here in the ruins. They end up making their way down, and this is where the Esoteric Order of Dagon Church is. They come across in this area trying to sneak into the back of the church. They know there is only one guard out front, and he looks pretty sleepy. So the thief goes in advance ahead of everybody else to see if he can unlock the back door, which is it's like those big storm cellar doors, the 2 of them, and it's chained and padlocked. He makes an amazing roll and with ease takes that lock off. The rest of the group, moving as quietly and sneakily as they can in broad daylight. Well, I'd say broad daylight, but it's still overcast. It is the middle of the day, and it is drizzling rain. But it's still easy to see people. However, they all made exceptional dexterity checks, except for Haley's Barbarian, who failed it miserably and fell on her face in the mud, unwittingly alerting some cultist in another building who happened to be looking out the window, draws his attention, and he knows that somebody's headed into the back of the church. But he doesn't show up right away. It takes him time to, got to get your robes on. So the rest of the party goes to the doors. They open the storm doors. There are a set of stone steps leading down, actually, to a big oak door that looks a lot newer than the rest of the stuff. It is locked. The thief unlocks it as well. And they open the door into a fairly large rectangular basement. Only it's not normal stuff stored in this basement. There are 3 rows with about 10 feet in between each row of iron cages, 4 cages deep. And each row has one of the cages has a female in the cage, still looking very disheveled, just thrown in there basically and locked up. The rest of the cages are empty and they don't see anybody else in the basement. There is a set of stairs on the other end of the room that lead up, presumably, into the church. So, they end up splitting the party. The party splits. The thief, one of the magic users, and one of the barbarians stay down below to try and open the doors on the cages and get these women out. 2 of the women are in hysterics, but they manage to calm them down, and they realize that they are not cultists. The 3rd woman is pretty much Barbara from Night of the Living Dead 68. She is completely catatonic. But they're working to free these women and get them out of there. Meanwhile, the rest of the party goes up the stairs. It opens into a little, like, 5x5 landing, but no doors out. As they're looking around, they realize that above them, there's like a pulley bar on a track. So they end up pulling and they hear it sliding stone on stone, and they're shifting something above them. They open it up about a 45-degree angle, and there's a room above them. They start climbing into the room, and it is now obvious that the altar that had been placed in here is a secret door that leads down into the basement. They evidently had walled up the normal basement door. They come up into a horrific scene where the pews have been removed from this church. Large chunks of dried coral have been placed all in here. There were dried guts and entrails and of all kind of creatures, including humans, presumably, all over the walls. All kind of cryptic writing and symbols in blood. Most of this is dry at this point. It is the first time that they have actually encountered a horrific scene that could cause corruption. Because in Ravenloft you can get corruption, and the corruption rules are for White Box are in the White Box Gothic book, and we use that, and a few of the characters did pick up a point of corruption for being in this unholy place. So, on top of the altar, which was stone, most of the place up here is wood, but the altar itself was stone, and it had all kind of things engraved on it, and it had a parchment that was sitting there that had been, it had a figurine on it, and this is the figurine that was sitting on there. This size, exactly. One of the dwarves took his hammer and tried to smash the figurine. He hit it with all of his might. All it did was knock it off of the altar and across the room. Didn't even scratch it. First clue that there's something special there. So, one of my wife's characters, she started lighting a torch and spreading oil everywhere because they intended to burn this place, because that's what my group does. They try to burn down everything. Well, one of Chris's characters, one of the dwarves, takes the parchment without reading it, just takes the parchment off of the altar and uses it to crumple around this thing and put it into his backpack. He doesn't want to touch it because they know it's special, they just don't know how special. So, Meanwhile, downstairs, as they're getting the women out of the cages and getting ready to leave, the group that stayed down there realizes they're not alone. As a creature drops down from the ceiling above that had been watching them, and it stands erect. And, I described it in all its glory, scaly, fish-headed detail, but it's a deep one, a big one. And combat ensues downstairs. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I figured that my player characters who were 3rd level would make short work of this one deep one. However, this battle began to drag on as none of them could hit anything. The deep one, however, was managing to hit. He managed to basically drop the thief down to 2 hit points, almost killing him. So upstairs, they're making quite a bit of noise. They hear someone shouting like he's running towards the church. And then they hear the guard at the door shout back to him. And then they start hearing keys rattle. So this guy that saw the barbarian fall has come to warn the guard at the church. So he's trying to get in the room. So now I have the party split, 2 combats going on 2 different levels of the church. One down in the basement, one in the sanctuary, or whatever you want to call it now. So what ends up happening at that point is the guard opens the door, and his fellow cultist buddy has got caught up with him. They come into the room upstairs. He pulls out this wicked looking knife and charges my wife's duelist. The other guy runs just inside the room and starts climbing a ladder, which they immediately assume, correctly, is going up to the bell tower. So as he's climbing up to the bell tower, one of the dwarves ends up running across the room, jumping up onto the ladder and doing a massive amount of damage in his swing into this guy's lower back, nearly cutting him in 2 as the guy screams and blood goes everywhere and he falls dead to the floor. The duelist misses, or the cultist attacking my wife's duelist misses his attack horribly, and she very easily, with both blades, right across the neck, and makes short work of him. Then she does something smart. She closes the door and locks it. They now have the keys to the church, and they're trying to get out of there before more of these people show up. In the meantime, as everybody's starting to work their way back through the hole by the altar downstairs, she drops a torch and sets the sanctuary on fire, and they head down. As they get to the bottom, they realize that there is a monster down there that is fighting with their friends, and they run up. The battle continues for a couple more rounds. I've never seen so many bad rolls in combat by players in my life, but they do eventually take down the deep one, and they get the women, and they slip out the back of the church as they can hear people running to the front of the church, and the church is on ground level is now on fire. The party is now slipping through the brush and the buildings and trying to work their way back to the north road up to the ruins, where they do eventually get and are able to sit and mend some wounds, bandage each other up, and catch a breather. Meanwhile, they're looking down the hill, the church fully engulfed in flames, and more of these people are being roused from their beds, and cultists and townsfolk are entering the streets. The party pushes further into the ruins to meet up with Zadok Allen. He tells them that they have really stirred the hornet's nest, that this is going to get really bad for anybody who's not a local, which, ding, clues the players into, oh man, Tommy, our friend that runs the shop down there, we've got to go save him, but it's almost dark. Zadok even tells them they should probably wait for the cover of darkness because any outsiders, they're going to set upon them. Well, just before dark, they split the party again. Most of the casters staying there with the women and Zadok in the ruins. The rest of them heading down moving between buildings, basically trying to cut across and come in through the slum area and work their way over here towards the back of the general store, hoping to not be seen. While they were at the ruins, though, before the party split, the magic user, Haley's magic user, the same one who had grabbed the rock with the weird star sign on it last week, got her hands on the idol. And when she did, her eyes started glowing green. She went into a trance-like state, and she saw a very similar image to the image that my wife's character saw last week when she was detecting chaos. She ended up on this island full of greenish black stone and some kind of entity there. Even though she felt evil everywhere, some kind of entity reaching into her mind. It almost felt like tentacles moving around her mind. And she doesn't know why, but she feels the need to almost pray to it or ask it for advice. At that point, Nathan's magic user uses his staff, knocks it out of her hands. There are some words that ensue between the party as they argue over what to do with this statue or idol. Meanwhile, watching the crowd in the town get larger and larger and the church burning down to the ground, basically, other than some supports, they see there are probably 70 or 80 cultists. And that doesn't count the regular townsfolk that there's probably a good 80 to 100 of that are now swarming like ants down at the bottom of the hill in the town. But they see that there is one cultist who looks different. He's larger than the others. He comes out with a pretty impressive staff and starts beginning to lead chanting. And all of these cultists are chanting, and they can't make out the language that's being chanted. It's very strange. And then the cultist throws his hood back and continues to chant, arms raised to the sky, and reveals that he has this almost octopod head with these large tentacles coming off of his face. Very fine looking fellow, if you ask me personally. But half the party decides to go down there anyway to save Tommy the shopkeeper. Now, we did end at that point, and they'll have to pick up next week with seeing if they can get to Tommy in time and if they can get out of the town without being hunted down. But I think there might be something special happening out on Devil's Reef, and the people who stayed up in the ruins are about to find out about that. All in all, we had a really good time. There was some, like I said, there was some argument over the statue and quite a bit of debate over how to split the party to do different things, and how they were going to get these women out of town, since they probably were not going to be welcome at the Gilman house anymore. We will have to wait until next week to find out what happens with all of that. Will they save Tommy? Will they get the women back to the town they came from? Will Nate's character ever see his horse alive again? Tune in next week for another episode of White Box Weekly, and I'll tell you just how bad my players screwed the pooch on this story again. Until next time, my friends, good gaming. Good luck.